Welcome to On the Half, an installment series highlighting featured artists for the Paterson Performing Arts Development Council's annual Hamilton Arts Festival. I am your host, Ebony K. Today, a discussion with PPADC's 2024 Playwright in Residence, Susan Justiniano, also known as Rescue Poetics. Rescue Poetics is deeply immersed in the arts across communities through collaborations and actively working in various capacities with New Jersey-based arts organizations in Paterson, Jersey City, and Oradell. She emerged as a professional artist and entrepreneur in 2006. A highly recognized published poet and spoken word artist, she has recorded over 50 original poems to music. She was named Poet Laureate of Jersey City in 2020, making her the state's first Puerto Rican woman to hold the title. In 2022, she was named New Jersey's Beat Poet Laureate by the National Beat Poetry Foundation. Her poetry is motivational, uplifting, and empowering as she spins verses in both Spanish and English and weaves stories around themes of strength, growth, and love. Susan Justiniano's dramatic play, By the Light of the Ghetto Moon, will be the center stage play of PPADC's annual Hamilton Arts Festival. By the Light of the Ghetto Moon explores a first-generation Puerto Rican woman coming to terms with her past traumas as the only girl, whose older brother gets away with everything, and two younger siblings whom she is expected to take care of, growing up in a patriarchal, strict Roman Catholic household in Paterson, New Jersey. Her perspectives are shared with the most consistent presence throughout her childhood, the moon. On behalf of PPADC, welcome to On the Half, Rescue Poetics.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful introduction. I appreciate that.
Thank you. So my leading question here is, as a decorated poet, can you explain your foray into the theater scene and what your hope is with the theatrical process?
That's a great question. As a poet, I spend a lot of time recording to music as well as performing poetry as spoken word. That in itself is part of the theater experience. It's very different than reading poetry, whether it's in print or reading it on stage in front of everyone. There's the performance aspect, and that part of it has always interested me and has always been the basis of a lot of the poems that I write. They're designed, I should say, the poems to perform on stage in front of a crowd with the expectation that there's going to be a connection at some point, and there usually is. Poetry, though it's subjective, has a lot of roots in experience with other people, because although we may create our art in silos, our art is not shared in silos. It is shared in a community that goes beyond even that what we can see sometimes. And taking a poem like By the Light of the Ghetto Moon, and which found its way on stage as a performed piece, the inspiration to then turn it into a theatrical piece was almost irresistible, in the way that there are so many connections through this story with so many different people and so many stories that are shared by women raised in a patriarchal society, which we all are. And that connection I have found every time that piece is performed, someone always comes up to me and says, that's my story. That's how I grew up. So to create that additional layer of connection is just incredible.
Yes, I agree. And there's always a power in connection and hearing your story being reflected. So with that, I want to talk about our narrator and protagonist, Jane. She experiences almost this sort of double consciousness between her cultural heritage and her identity. How does the setting of Paterson, New Jersey allow for further exploration of her identity, especially in the context of your own upbringing in Paterson and building the art scene?
Thank you for that. So Jane comes back to Paterson as a way to put to bed the demons of the past, right? So much has changed in the last, and I want to say 30, 40 years, in how women are expected to act in the face of trauma, how women are expected to treat their past as something, and this is how I was raised, in something that you don't talk about. You don't mention things that you've experienced as a woman. You sucked it up and you dealt with it. The dichotomy of being resilient, being strong, while that contradiction of, if you're too strong, then you're more like a man. So there's a balance in there that has to be found. And more often than not, something is given up. And in giving up the ability to be strong and vulnerable at the same time is one of those things that is changing. Women are less expected to be resilient, to be ladylike, to be these different definitions that are created. And that's the transition that Jane sees and feels in herself as she's going back to her past and recognizing these different things that shaped who she is. And some of those lessons she took in with her into the future and into her present life. And some of them she's learning to leave behind where they all started, in Paterson. Because in order to grow, you have to eliminate those things that are holding you back, those anchors. And that's what this play is about. Releasing those things that no longer serve, that no longer help to grow you or evolve you as a human into something else.
Yes, and that is such a difficult path for us to take, especially as women, because you are right. We are told and taught to be resilient, and that resilience may look like not talking about your past traumas. But Jane confronts them through her visit to Paterson, New Jersey. She also is accompanied by the moon. And I love this aspect of the poem, of the play. So my next question is about the moon as kind of this gracious guide for Jane as she works through her past traumas. What inspired you to have the moon act as almost an ancestral healing energy figure in this play?
You made some very important points in your question. It is ancestral. We are all connected through the moon. And I know this is a trope in poetry to talk about the moon, but this is a different aspect of the moon, where the moon is somewhat a mischievous moon, also compassionate moon, also based in reality, and can be somewhat harsh in the expressions used or the expressions put back to Jane in this play. The moon is a constant, and no matter what we're doing, just like the sun, it rises and it sets, no matter who we are and what we do and where we're doing it. To ignore the fact that that's such an imminent presence in our lives is for me almost disrespectful, because if you're ignoring that, you're ignoring anything and everything that is witnessed by your ancestors through this embodiment of spirit. And the moon is a constant in Jane's life, where no matter what was going on, the moon witnessed it. If no one else did, the moon witnessed it. Because a lot of things that happen in Latino culture, Latinx culture, Latinx culture, Hispanic culture happens as the sun is setting. You have your daytime stuff where you're expected in this regimented family living, this dynamic of, mother, father, children, do what you're supposed to do. Children should be seen and not heard. But at night, it's like a lot of things are released. And the experiences that develop through the night, whether it's a form of acceptance of heritage, whether it's sitting on the porch and hanging out with your community, that those things start late in the day into the night. And that's what that is that understanding that things happen at night that usually wouldn't happen during the day for a lot of reasons. And the moon is always there for that, whether it's in a piece, whether it's an imagination, whether it's a character that's developed, the moon is there.
Yes, and that's such an important point too, because I feel as though maybe oftentimes we overlook, or you're right, almost forget those things that do happen when the moon is out, and the things that the moon sees, especially within our own character development, and the work that we do, sometimes the hard work that we do. Um, and that is reflected too, through Jane. I feel like she experiences a lot of revelations and kind of processes her past traumas with the moon as a guide. So I love that aspect of the play as well. I want to kind of switch gears a little bit and continue talking about identity. I like this concept of the disillusionment of the American dream, and how it's represented and by the light of the ghetto moon. Um, can you further explain how the play demonstrates how this dream may not be a possibility, especially for Norwegians?
Yeah, that's an important point to make, because we have all been sold a bill of goods that has nothing to back it. The American dream was always you own a house, you own property, you have 2.4 kids, a dog, etc., etc. We're all supposed to have this perfect neighborhood that we're living in. And that's not the reality for a lot of us. When you have an accent, when you're not blonde hair, blue-eyed, Americanized, you're considered second-class citizen. And that was part of the upbringing of not speaking with an accent, of speaking perfect English, of speaking, should I say perfect American, and not speaking Spanish, not being taught Spanish. There's a lot lost in that. The American dream is a whitewashing of culture, where the expectation is, well, you're here now, you can forget who you were in the past, you can leave everything that has made you who you are, and now you're an American. But America, for all its faults and all its problems, was not built by a single culture. And it came upon other cultures, like the Native Americans being here. That was the original culture here. And to have the expectation of, well, we have this vision of now these perfect Americans, blonde hair, blue eyes, wealthy, beautiful, all these other things, to fit the 6 foot whatever height and be a model. All Americans are supermodel types. That's just not even a real thing. But it's pushed and pushed and pushed by media, by the commercials we see, by the clothes we see, by fashion, the fashion industry here, and just all these ridiculous expectations. And there's a lot lost in that. So there's no respect for other cultures that come to this country and make this country what it is. Because without the other cultures, there is no American culture. And that's part of what this piece shows, that, you know, you have this American dream, but it failed. It failed, and it's designed to fail for most of us. And this is how it fails. It fails because there's no respect for anyone who's gone into the military and served this country, from another country, or from a culture that has an accent or speaks differently than the army lingo that's there, right? You have a house, you're supposed to have a house, but when they tell you about the dream of the American dream of the house, you're saddled with a mortgage, you're saddled with taxes, you're saddled with insurance, you're saddled with the expectation of taking care of this home that you're supposed to have without being taught how to do any of those things. And then that could be taken away from you in the blink of an eye for any little thing, where you're given this dream, you're given all these things, quote unquote given, right? But there's a price for all of that. And those things are never spoken about or never taught when speaking of the American dream. So then it becomes a hollow piggy bank with a hole at the bottom that every time you put money into it, it just disappears. And then you have nothing to show for it at the end, except you still owe a bank who owns your house. You still owe the state or the city that owns a property that your house is on. And if you don't buy a new car every year or every 2 years, then you're out of sync with what the American dream is supposed to be.
Yes, I agree with that. And I really like what you said about the American dream coming at a cost, and that cost being kind of almost a denial of cultures, kind of like on a macroscopic level within America, but then also microscopically, which is what Jane experiences. She has these instances where, she is not white enough to be white, but she is either longing to fit into, her setting and then still carry with her heritage. Why was that important for you to emphasize kind of like that internal struggle or conflict she was experiencing?
Throughout Jane's entire life, she was denied understanding and knowing her heritage, and denied at the convenience of her caregivers, the adults around her, right? There were cultures that were constantly embedded in her. Food was constantly, different types of Puerto Rican food, as well as some of the cultural aspects, the music. Playing dominoes was very much a Puerto Rican thing. Men, it being patriarchal, men taking care of men kind of thing, and the women taking care of everything else, where the man was the breadwinner and the care and the person to protect, while the women stayed at home, or the women were expected to live up to this unrealistic dynamic of being a breadwinner, but also being taking care of everything, taking care of their men, taking care of their children. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in that, that's a convenience where as a child, girls are not allowed to speak out against the wrongs committed to them, right? And that's also a cultural thing. And not speaking Spanish or not being taught Spanish growing up. Now, that's not the original language of the Taino people, but it is the modern language, right? So in that, there's a loss of culture as well. And it was important for Jane in order to discover who she is as a person, that was part of it. And through personal research and knowing the history of the Puerto Rican people helps to embody that culture of Puerto Rico. Because without knowing the history, there's no growth there. There's no discovery. And there are things that happen in the past that have been repeated and people don't talk about. So that's another thing. There's also many different things, like the history of the flag is a whole play by itself. It's a whole discovery by itself. The history of the culture and the music of Puerto Rico, where it came, where it started, where it's going to, is a whole other topic of history. In addition to the protests, the things that have happened to Puerto Rico by the United States and continue to happen today. So it's important to understand that culture, and to understand it, you have to be immersed in it. I'm a big believer in you can't affect change if you're standing on the sidelines looking in. And Jane, as a child, was that person standing on the sidelines looking in, not knowing at what point she should be participating in what was going on. Whether it's the American culture, the culture of being raised in a city like Paterson, which is a very diverse city, had multiple different cultures, or in her own family dynamic. So that was the whole impetus of learning who she was when she turned 18. Because at that point, she had control over it. Nobody else did.
Yes, and I think that 18 is such a great age for Jane to be at when she's kind of having these discoveries because you're just on the precipice of adulthood and you're able to begin to make sense of these things and kind of like also begin deconstructing um, and having a voice and participating um, in your culture, in your community, and then even just working through any trauma that you might have experienced within your family unit or um, externally. So I think that's great. And that is what I love about this play. Um, so, with that said, what do you hope audiences will take away from By the Light of the Ghetto Moon?
I'm hoping that they find a little bit of themselves in this play, in this experience, in experiencing the different types of growth and evolution that are in this play. Whether you're looking at it and looking back into yourself as a child and recognizing some of those things that you never had a word for before or didn't really know what they were, or at 18 or at whatever stage in your life that you say to yourself, you know what, I don't need to accept this anymore. I can make those decisions now. I don't need to blame anyone for what it is I'm experiencing from this point forward. This is my choice. Or later in life, again, at whatever stage, looking back and saying, all those things taught me something, and it's time to leave them behind. So this is that growth that I hope people connect with. Also with the cultural aspect of it. It's not just a Puerto Rican story. Many cultures experience this disconnect from themselves, from their ancestors, from what their beliefs are. And that can be seen from parent to child to grandchild, how much further the disconnect can get if you're not part of that culture on a regular basis.
Yes, that's such an important point. This is such a universal story, and so many people will see themselves, their family members, their ancestors being represented through Jane's story. So thank you for that as the playwright. Lastly, what made you entrust PPADC with your vision of By the Light of the Ghetto Moon?
PPADC is such an important part of Paterson because, it's where I grew up. And the fact that PPADC is reaching out to have these stories told in the voices of the playwrights or the poets and the performers, that's another cultural component of PPADC and of By the Light of the Ghetto Moon. There's such a connection there. And to be part of the Hamilton Arts Festival and the Playwright in Residence, I have to say, is a coming home for me. Me as a person, me as an artist who has always wanted to be part of the Renaissance in Paterson, and to be able to do that in such a free and open environment of PPADC is an incredible dream come true for me.
And it's incredible for us to have you, and we're honored for this to be a homecoming and a celebration of the progress that we're making in Paterson and the art scene and what the future looks like for us. So thank you so much, Rescue. It has been a pleasure interviewing you today.
Thank you, Ebony. The pleasure has been mine.
Thank you. This has been On the Half. I'm your host, Ebony K. You can visit our website and follow Paterson Performing Arts Development Council on social media for all updates on this year's Hamilton Arts Festival happening from June 13th through June 22nd. You can find all of our information in the description of this video. Be sure to come out and see our center stage production of By the Light of the Ghetto Moon. We look forward to seeing you at this year's festival.